Hello, welcome back to my fave fanfics. Here, I post, well, my favorite fanfictions, if that wasn't obvious. I do hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do. Please like and subscribe for more content. Without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome, my dear faves, to the 10th part of What If My Hero Academia Reacts to Hunter x Hunter. Credit goes to Makifinity. Chapter 11. Trick X to X the Trick. Majitani laid unconscious on the floor, right shoulder engulfed by the false phantom troop tattoo. Here's some advice. 1. Kurapika spoke. A genuine phantom troop tattoo has a member number inscribed inside. 2. Kurapika continued, standing tall and tense only a few feet away from Majitani. They don't bother tallying the number of how many they've killed. Ochako hummed with a twinge of somberness. Despite Kurapika's cold demeanor at the moment, she sympathized with the pain he was feeling. To be all alone. 3. Never mention the phantom troop again. Or, Kurapika said, turning his head to reveal angry red eyes. I will kill you. Trumpets played strongly as the title read, The Trick X to X the Trick. The torches on the platform burned strongly, as the group, with Kurapika sitting in the back hallway, stood awaiting the start of the next match. Lirio has volunteered for the 4th round. With the prisoners, only one cloaked figure stood in the front, the other 3 retreated into the darkness of their hallway. If he wins, the group's victory is assured. Positive thinking leads to positive outcomes. Mirio declared brightly. I wonder, are they going to get that other prisoner out of the way first? Momo said. The bridges extended out connecting both sides to the platform in the middle, Majitani's unconscious form still laid out. But will he be able to? The image fuzzed and panned out, appearing through a television screen which Lippo watched, alongside tens of other areas in Trick Tower. The man tapped across his keyboard momentarily before humming, taking a satisfying crunch out of the chips he held. Lirio's footsteps could be heard as he stood forward. Okay. He shouted, pointing his finger to the other side. I'll finish up the job. Toss that guy out, and send in your next competitor. He demanded loudly, voice echoing. A pair of bare feet walked forward, before they let out a giggle. We can't do that, they said. Huh? Exclamation mark. Bakugo barked questioningly, an irritated feeling already rising. Trouble so soon. Recovery girl sighed. The students watched the screen with barely held suspicion. Toga yawned lazily, watching with lazy interest. What did you say? Lirio shot back, clutching his fists immediately. We can't move him yet, because his match isn't over yet, they explained, while walking across the bridge. The match isn't over yet. Lirio repeated after her, an angered look on his face. What do you mean? The man shouted over at the prisoner. They walked over slowly to where Majitani lay, kneeling down next to him. After a moment, they looked over to where the group stood on the other side. He's still alive. He's only knocked out, they revealed. The atmosphere grew serious and tense as the group took in the information. Wait. Seriously. He has to kill him, because the idiot was big talking earlier. Juro said, remembering Majitani's arrogant claims. Bro, Kaminari whispered, his expression tense. All Might's spine went rigid, recalling the rules Majitani had laid out. Did you forget? This was a death match. The fight doesn't end until one contestant surrenders or dies, they explained, standing back up. He's still alive, and he hasn't surrendered. With a sly giggle, they turned around and walked back to their side. Damn. That's splitting hairs. Lirio said spitefully, crossing his arms. But she's right, Kahlua spoke up. I agree, Gon said as well. Lirio gritted his teeth, grumbling. I see. The group of students felt a slight relief wash over them at the prisoner's words. All they need to do is wake him so he can surrender. Ochako smiled. Annoying technicalities, Aizawa grumbled. All Might watched the screen carefully, a foreboding feeling in his gut that it wouldn't be so easy. He turned around swiftly, a hand on his hip, to where Kurapika sat solemnly with his eyes closed. The others turned as well, watching expectantly. Hey, Kurapika. Lirio called out. Go finish off that piece of trash. I refuse, Kurapika replied. Huh. Lirio blurted out, his arms falling limp at his side. Why? The man erupted, his arms flailing out. Finish him. He can just make him surrender, Sir Night-Eye said, pushing his glasses up in slight startlement. Midoriya frowned at Lirio's words. That's not their only option. The fight is over, Kurapika said with his eyes open. It flashed back to Kurapika holding Majitani up by the jaw. He'd already lose his will to fight. Kurapika's fist had tightened, as Majitani blubbered in his hold, before getting punched not seconds later. When I punched him. The flashback dissipated into fire, the torches on the platform crackling, Majitani's shadow flickering slightly a few inches where he laid on the ground. I will not continue to fight a loser, Kurapika said. Now's really not the time to act uptight, Bakugo glared at the screen. Mirio rubbed the back of his neck. I get it, there's no point in kicking someone who's already down. But he said, I give. I remember that, Suyu pondered. Screw that. Then what do we do? Lirio argued adamantly, despite Kurapika's calm yet resigned demeanor. They're claiming that the match hasn't ended. Lirio shouted with his fists clenched at his sides, shoulders raised. Leave it up to him, Kurapika answered, drawing a confused noise from Lirio who dropped his stance. Huh. Quote. Once he wakes up, we'll have our answer, Kurapika told him. Hey, come on, Lirio tried to reason, holding out a hand. We only have so much time left. We can't afford to just sit and wait. The man desperately tried to convey. Lirio's got a point here, Ciro gestured. That fool could be out for the rest of the night, Gran Torino added. Kurapika should just wake him up, Sato reasoned. I have no intention of doing anything to him, Kurapika said, raising his voice, a stubborn look on his face. Come on. Lirio continued to heckle. Hey, Kahlua interrupted, drawing the attention of both. If you don't want to do it, I'll do it, Kahlua offered, stepping closer. Kahlua. Gon questioned behind him. You haven't killed anyone before, right? Kahlua continued, hands in his pockets. Are you scared? Kurapika's head remained tilted downwards, eyes closed as he contemplated. Magna raised a brow, her arms crossed. Ballsy. All Might's eyebrows drew together, skin creased like a tight band. Some of the teachers could barely hold back the sharp gasp at Killua's offer. If he's implying what I think he is, then, Kaminari trailed off hesitantly. All for one sat pensively, his body betraying no signs of what he was thinking. I have never considered if murder is frightening or not, the teen said. After a moment, he continued. This is a one-on-one battle. You aren't permitted to step in, he reminded the younger boy. Okay, then, Kahlua said in a blasé tone, eyes closed. But we're working as a team, so you shouldn't be too selfish, he lightly scolded with a childish expression, pointing a finger up. Oh. Lirio startled, from the unexpected support. You do say useful things sometimes. Keep it up. Quote. Backhanded much. Juros said. Toga let out a small huff of air, frustrated. This is boring. When are they going to skip the talking and stab someone, she said. Midoriya ignored the outburst, thinking to himself. Why are they presenting killing him as their only solution? Single quote. Lirio turned back to Kurapika, adopting an angry look. Don't you understand that you're screwing up our chances? The blonde remained unfazed, not bothering to look at the older. I'm sorry, but I won't change my mind. Lirio leaned down in front of him, inches away from his face. You stubborn fool, the man gritted out. Fine, then. He stood suddenly, with a determined look on his face, arms stretched upward. Time for majority decision. Gon and Killua watched him passively. O to kill him, and X to keep him alive. Kurapika paid no attention, as Tonpa watched smugly at the scene, laughing to himself. Ready and, Lirio continued on in the background. A few of the students winced, reading the situation on screen. He hasn't even gotten to his match yet, and he's already fucking up, Bakugo twitched. Can they even hold their own votes? Ojiro spectated. Most likely not, Tokiyami sighed, closing his eyes. Lirio pushed the O button on his watch. The scoreboard remained dark and blank, the draft from below the only noise heard. Moments later he exploded in a rage. Why isn't it working? Exclamation mark. He shouted, his hands cupped out in front of him. Probably it's because we're asking the question. Gon answered him. Huh. Lirio turned to the smaller boy on his left, confused. The timers only work for questions presented by the examiners, Gon told him. Lirio's face twisted in irritation. I see. Oh dear, Nedzu said pensively. Shigaraki snorted, watching the group starting to crumble quickly. Oki. He began again, holding out his palm, face stubborn. Then we'll use a show of hands. He proclaimed, his hand already in the air. Those who agree that he should be finished off. Yes. He yelled out, raising his hand again in the air proudly, his eyes closed with a smirk. At the silence, he opened his eyes and startled at the group staring at him with deadpan looks. Kurapika remained seated paying no attention to the commotion. You traitor. Lirio accused, leaning down at Killua who watched him with wide eyes. Weren't you just lecturing Kurapika with me? We're supposed to be a team. The man continued to remark. More like he realizes there's no point to it, Zero commented. The only one who can do anything about this is Kurapika, and he keeps pushing him, Mina muttered, hand on her chin. But it's pointless. Killua said to him, turning to look at Kurapika. He's not gonna change his mind. Lirio quickly turned to the other direction. Hey, Gon. Why do you oppose killing him? Lirio interrogated. Kurapika's right. He was on the verge of surrendering, the young boy said, raising a finger. The green-haired boy side-eyed Kurapika for a moment, before turning back to Lirio. Let's wait for him to wake up, he offered to Lirio. We don't know how long that will take, Lirio hassled. He crossed his arms, thinking. I should just. No one else slightly disturbed that the only reason that they're all giving for not killing the prisoner is that it could jeopardize the match. Snipe said under his breath. Vlad King slightly grunted in agreement, a cross expression on his face. You shouldn't force others to do things, Tonpa spoke, drawing the attention of the three. Different people have different circumstances and ideals. Lirio uncrossed his arms. No one asked for your opinion, he rudely told him. Hey, Tanpa said, waving his hands in truce. A majority ruling implies that you're asking everyone's opinion, he said. Lirio scoffed, gritting his teeth in anger, fists clenched. Damn it. Fine. Do whatever you want. Quote. Of course this idiot would pick the time to speak up now, Bakugo grumbled, knowing full well how Lirio allowed Tanpa to get under his skin. Things were just looking up for them, Present Mike sighed worryingly. Lirio shoved his hands into his pockets and stomped to the back of the hallway, Gon and Kahlua sharing a look before watching his retreating back. Lirio, Gon called out. The man stopped and crouched facing away from them. Man, what's wrong with these people? He mumbled angrily. Now he's sulking, Gon said, as the entire group turned to look at the now brooding Lirio. None of this matters if we can't even progress, he grumbled with an angry look. Don't you get it? Quote. He's right, but choosing to be part of the problem won't help you solve it, Aizawa said, blinking his eyes repeatedly. Great, out of the 5 of them, 2 don't even seem like they want to participate anymore. The group is practically falling apart, Juro thought to herself. Momo stared at the screen, wondering when the mood of the group fell so fast. Just leave him alone, Kahlua said, removing his arms that rested behind his head, turning back to the front. A nasty smirk appeared on Tampa's face. Fools, they've completely fallen into the trap behind majority rules, the rookie crusher thought. His smirk extended into a grin. You would expect it to be easier for 5 strangers who've just met to make decisions by majority rule, he said internally. He stood in the middle, staring at Lirio's turned back, while Kurapika was off to the side on his own, Kahlua standing at the very front of the platform they were on, and Gon a few feet behind him. You'd think if he knew all the rules so well, he would have passed the exam by now, Shinso brooded to himself. But they kind of know each other, Suyu croaked. Not enough to work quite well as a team, and considering one of them is known for sabotage, Nedzu chimed in. A chibi version of the group's faces all popped up in front of a checkered background as Tanpa continued. While this method appears to revere each individual opinion, in actuality it suppresses the minority. Their faces shrunk back a bit and spaced out from each other, before shuffling quickly. Lirio was cast to the side as the odd one out, his miniature face looking disgruntled momentarily before smiling again. When a person consistently finds himself in the minority, his opinion is always rejected. Lirio was shuffled out again, looking a bit angrier but returning back to the small smirk as the shuffle continued. Team dynamics might look a little too much for something such as majority rule, but without it, everything falls apart, Mirio explained. The ability to work efficiently in last-minute groups in a high-stress, deadly environment, Izuku said subconsciously. Sounds a lot like hero training, Mina said, remembering the mock battles they had done on the second day of school. For the 3rd time, Lirio was shuffled out of the group again, looking at the rest of the group with an irritated expression. It shuffled once more and Lirio stuck as the odd one out, an enraged expression on his face. With a wild shriek, his head grew over 3 times as big than it was before, the other faces of the group looking shocked. His alienation, anger and discontent lead to antagonism, Tanpa thought. With a puff, Lirio blew out fire onto the group, whose eyes clenched shut in surprise, before Lirio blew fire across the entire screen, wiping it clean. Eventually, the team disintegrates. It's not like it's being done on purpose, Uraraka huffed, struggling to find the right words. Between Liario's strong personality, Tonpa acting as a catalyst, and then things getting complicated with Kurapika's match, it completely set him off, Sir Night Eyes said, rubbing his chin. Tonpa's smug face came back to view. After all, we're rivals in the Hunter exam. The feeling of being forced to go along with choices made by someone else can feel foolish and annoying, he reflected, watching Liario's hunched back, the man's expression completely pissed off. But having caught up in the spirit of this test, it flashed back to Liario raising his arm, clicking the O button on the timer, and the scoreboard remaining blank. He's begun using majority rule in unrelated situations. It showed Liario's rage over the screen not working. And he made the mistake of holding a discussion before the vote. Tonpa smirked even wider. He even tried to use majority rule in the worst form, a public show of hands. It flashed back to Liario raising his hand, while the others fixed him blank looks. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the guy's a complete idiot, but they shouldn't leave him in charge to address things, Snipe said, rubbing his neck. He certainly came up with one of the worst ways to solve a problem. Take this as an example, Aizawa said towards the class, resisting the urge to pinch his brow. Liario's hunched form appeared again, as he remained unmoving in the corner he settled in. Unlike when people press the buttons of their own timers, everyone knows who diverged from the majority. Kurapika remained seated, uncaring of Liario's outburst and subsequent glooming. So the minority can't even protest the decision. Kahlua appeared, looking over at the other side with an unreadable expression. When someone feels they have no say, and that their opinions are constantly rejected, Gon grunted in effort as he stretched his legs out, before standing back up to lean over and stretch his back. So what now? Are they just waiting or? Zero asked hesitantly. Everyone looks like they're doing their own thing, Tokiyami said. What a sticky situation, Mr. Compress said passively. More like the dream teams crashed and burned, Magnus said bluntly. The group breaks down. Kahlua was now seated at the very front of the platform, watching the other side, while Gon stretched out, Kurapika lost in his own thoughts, and Liario glaring at the steel bars that prevented the group from going back into the hallway. In our case, it means all 5 of us will fail the exam. It's just a matter of time, Tonpa finished, with a victorious grin on his face. He brought up a hand to muffle his chuckling. Is it just me, or did his explanation piss me off because it actually made sense? Jiro glared at the screen. Liario wasn't wrong, however his means of resolving it only made it worse. Antagonizing your teammates won't push them on your side of the matter, Aizawa said. Kirishima watched the screen with a slightly forlorn expression. The prisoners appeared, the cloaked figure in front standing observing the other side, while Bendot and Sadokan sat facing each other leaning on the opposite sides of the wall in the hallway. The atmosphere on the other side is gloomy, Sadokan noted. The figure only laughed in response. Smart. They found a loophole to not only postpone their match, but broke down the team in one fell swoop, Dabi thought to himself, before letting the thought flee. A dark hallway appeared, with concrete floors, dim lights attempting to light the way. Rumbling could be heard as a door opened, light spreading into the dark room as a familiar figure stood in the doorway. Walking forward, a person was seated on the ground, head bowed in wait. A green flame erupted brightly, Hisoka standing in the middle of the room, as red candles leading up a staircase ignited with fire behind him. A slight shiver ran down Kaminari's spine. Ah, this guy again. Nejire tilted her head slightly. I wonder which route he ended up in. An eerie green glow was cast, his expression unfazed, eyes slitted and narrow. "I've been waiting for you," spoke the man wearing a sleeveless fur coat that exposed his chest. He looked up, with deep scars running across his face, a grin on his face. "Hisoka. I'm not an examiner this year, I'm here for revenge," he bluntly declared, his voice echoing in the spacious room. "Ever since last year's exam, all I've thought about was killing you," he admitted, standing up to full height. "That's the examiner he almost killed," Midnight murmured. Shigaraki raised an eyebrow to the prisoner's claim. "You barely got out with your life the last time, fool," the villain thought. The students remained silent, already getting a suspecting feeling that the fight would end up bloody. A sound of metal swishing through air could be heard as the curved blade of a sword glinted sharply. "Today, I'll get payback," the man promised, the sword clutched outwards in the grip of his right arm. "For my scars." With a flick of his wrist, he twirled the sword impressively, eyes wide and vengeful before swinging it out menacingly. A soft noise came from Hisoka, as a smile crept onto his face. "Those scars merely show that you were an incompetent examiner," the magician taunted slightly. The man kept smiling, as he reached around and pulled out a second blade, twirling it. "You're blaming me for your own inadequacies." "Well shit, he's not wrong," Dabi gestured. "He got the jump on you and you paid for it. Know your own limits and when you're out of your league." Mr. Compress chuckled a little knowingly. "Oh, he might just be finding that out soon." "Shut up." With a flick, the blade in his right hand spun viciously, resembling more of a disc than a blade. The blade in his left hand had been done the same. "Prepare to die," the man said in a finished tone. Hisoka watched, cat-like eyes examining. "Two-blade style," the man said to himself. The creeping smile on his face fell off as his eyes shot to the air with a small gasp. A mariachi-style guitar strummed in the back. The man had thrown up the two blades into the air, reaching behind him again to pull out two more as the pair of blades in the air rotated in what seemed like slow motion. "All direction four-blade style," the man proudly exclaimed. "Ooh, they're really pretty," Toga cooed. "Not as impressive as Staney's." Quote. "Is it practical for him to use all four during combat?" Iida questioned. "Well, one has to be very skilled to know how to use all four effectively, or they're going to do nothing but hinder your attacks," Aizawa replied to him. "He must be pretty skilled to use them against someone like Hisoka," Momo softly spoke. "Let's hope skilled is the word," Uraraka murmured, thinking back to Hisoka's massacre in Swindler's Swamp. With a roar, he said, "Take this," flinging the two blades in his hand directly at Hisoka. The redhead planted a firm foot on the ground, springing off of it, his hand lightly grazing the ground for momentum, his body twisting mid-air to avoid the pair of blades that sliced through. He landed gracefully on his feet, as the man charged again with a shout, bearing two of the blades in a full frontal attack. He swung tenaciously, as Hisoka doubled over, his midsection narrowly avoiding the range of the sharp blades. "Holy shit," Siro awed, before his eyes instinctively flicked over at Iida to see if he'd be reprimanded. The boy in question along with the rest of the class were captivated by the screen. Clown's got moves, Shigaraki thought, trying to keep his facade of uninterest. Two blades, spinning and cutting through the air like butter, rushed at Hisoka from behind while the man swung at Hisoka from the front. With a mere glance behind, the magician performed a backward handspring, a blade cutting into his side, blood spurting, before he landed back on his feet. The prisoner threw up the two blades in his hands, catching the two that came flying in his direction. Hisoka stood up to his full height, mouth set in a flat line. "It's not over yet." The man jeered loudly, flinging the blades in his hands again in Hisoka's direction, the man watching carefully as they rushed to him. A few flinched at the cut. "Whoa, he actually got him there," Kirishima exclaimed, watching with slight surprise. "He's really agile," Izuku muttered under his breath, scribbling down a few notes marking Hisoka's flexibility and gracefulness. At the last second, he leaned dramatically, back almost touching the floor, the blades rushing past him. He planted both hands on the ground, his feet extending out straight in a perfect handstanding before maneuvering his body out the way of another blade that narrowly missed him. His legs twisted around and behind him, his upper body following as he landed on his feet. The prisoner laughed, watching Hisoka duck out the way of one blade, and weave from one that urged to slice his head from his shoulders. His athleticism is impressive, but it's not keeping him completely out of the danger zone. "I wonder what he's planning," Vlad King said. "That guy might just be giving him a run for his money," Mina said hopefully. Recovery Girl squinted carefully. "I wouldn't say so just yet." Nedzu nodded in silent agreement. "Up, down, left, right," the man taunted. Hisoka turned, missing another blade that came flying at him, before throwing himself away from another flying blade. "Front and back, you have nowhere to run." Quote, "You'll be cut from every angle, by my endless stream of blades," the man told him, catching a pair of blades, to throw them again. "Dodging my waves of infinite attacks is impossible." Quote. Hisoka leapt off the ground, airborne as he twisted his body between two blades aimed for where his feet were moments ago, and his neck. With a flip, he landed on his feet once more, spread in a defensive stance. Snipe let out a low whistle. "He's moving like gravity isn't even a thing." Everyone in the theater was getting a sense of how much more skilled Hisoka was than they thought. "Tch. Bakugo rolled his eyes, with an annoyed look. The man tossed a pair of blades, catching the other pair as he continued talking. "I'll have you writhing in pain," he said with a dark eagerness, eyes blown wide with bloodlust. Hisoka analyzed carefully, hazy yellow eyes observing. Two blades came rushing again at him, as the man lunged for another front attack. Quote, "And then you'll die, Hisoka." The prisoner's dark blue eyes filled with contempt appeared, pinned directly on Hisoka, who stood steadfast, eyes widening momentarily. Tokiyami perked up in alertness, wondering if Hisoka had finally been cornered. A few of the teachers held their breath carefully. Hisoka's shadow illuminated on the wall enlarged, stumbled back as two blades dug into it. The prisoner let out a noise of shock, eyes disbelieving as he reared back. Eri gasped lightly, her hands coming up to cover over her face, her eyes peeking through her fingers. In front of him stood Hisoka, holding the two blades that were slicing through the air. "It would indeed be difficult to dodge your attacks," Hisoka's voice purred out lowly, nonchalant despite the ripped fabric on his shoulder from a blade. His tongue lapped out to lick one of the sharp blades. "So I should simply stop the blades," he said to the man, approaching him slowly. "Impossible, it took me over half a year to master catching those blades." The man thought, sweat dripping down the side of his face from exertion and fear. Seriously. In just those few moments, could Hisoka have possibly? Midoriya wondered, his hand holding the pen frozen above the notebook. They won't stop him, will they? Mirio said to himself, hopeful that what happened in Swindler's Swamp was because of the circumstances. However, the doubts began to creep back in. Hisoka's curled toe shoes came to a stop, the pair of blades in his hands spinning terrifyingly. "Oh," Hisoka hummed. "It was easier than I anticipated," he added, stopping the spinning blades in his hands. His face stretched wide, eyes narrowed with a thin all-too-knowing grin, face partially darkened from the shadows casted by the green glowing candles. "I appreciate your futile efforts," the magician goaded in a subdued voice. Hagakure shivered from the predatory look on Hisoka's face. "Creepy, this dude is way too creepy," most of the class thought. All Might's brows twitched at the teasing tone of Hisoka's voice, knowing the fate of the prisoner was sealed. Aizawa switched from the screen to Eri, before making the split-second decision to obscure her vision with one hand. The prisoner's eyes were pinprick small with terror, sweat beading down his brow. "Damn it!" He cursed with a howl, head cast back, his shadow painted on the expanse of the wall behind them. With a sound of metal slicing through flesh, the shadow stood without a head, before falling over. The blood-red candles flickered at the gust of strong wind, blowing out with a hiss, leaving the room obscured in darkness. A few, such as Kota, violently flinched. Toga's lips pursed at the censor. Kirishima sat still, with a pensive frown on his face. "It seems like every time we're going to see this guy, he's going to remind us they're letting a whole murderer just do what he wants," Ojiro said, slightly hysterical. A large circular area appeared, lit bright by two strong torches, whose flames filled the place with sound. Amidst the crackling of the fires, a rumbling was heard, as one of the many doors lined along the walls of the area opened from the bottom up, revealing Hisoka. The man strutted in, eyes closed as a speaker overhead announced, "Applicant number 44, Hisoka, is the first to pass the third phase." His eyes opened with a smug look, standing alone in the large room. Total time, 6 hours and 17 minutes. For a phase that gives the limit of 3 days, it's certainly impressive he accomplished it in hours, Nedzu commented. "What's this guy even doing taking the exam? I know it's not some strength test, but it feels like at his level, someone like him should have gotten his license years back," Present Mike wondered. A circumstance could have risen where he didn't need a license before, but now he needs one, Sir Night-Eye speculated. The hunter license supposedly does open a lot of doors when you have one, Power Loader offered. Night fell outside of the tower, the only light source provided by the crescent moon hanging above. The wrist timer read 60 hours and 57 minutes counting on Liorio's watch, the man scoffing bitterly as he now lay on the ground, his arms propping up his head. Tonpa was now seated with his arms behind his head, against the wall facing towards Kurapika, who hadn't moved from where he first sat. Kahlua leaned against the wall a few feet away from the blonde, hands in his pockets. Gon stood at the front out of the hallway, looking over at the prisoners' side. "They've been like this for hours," Mirio said with a slight hint of worry. Nejire sighed softly. "How hard did he really hit the guy?" Quote. Tamaki's ear twitched at Nejire's offhand comment. Kurapika's eyes were closed in concentration, Tonpa appearing to be focused as well, before slyly smirking, his eyes cracking open. Gon gazed with his mouth set in a subtle frown. Kahlua opened his eyes momentarily, before leaning off of the wall, walking to where Gon stood. "Is there something wrong, Gon?" Kahlua asked, casting the boy a look. "Uh-huh," Gon agreed, before extending a finger out to the platform. "Well yeah, the guy's practically dead to the world over there," Kaminari snorted. For a suspiciously long time, Shinso said, eyeing the screen. He pointed directly to where Majitani was still unconscious. Kilua's eyes widened, his face shifting in realization before murmuring, "I see." The pale-haired boy approached where Lirio laid on the ground with his eyes closed. "Hey," he began. Kilua, and gone a bit further back, appeared to be standing upside down as Lirio looked at them from where he laid. "It's quite possible that he's already dead," Kilua told him, as he and Gon turned back around again to look at Majitani. A few looked startled at the claim. "Dead from one punch?" Todoroki blinked. "Kiro, that seems unlikely," Suyu said. "Not so much, depending on strength and experience, a single punch can be deadly," All Might intervened. "If it comes from you, no doubt it's deadly," most of the audience silently thought to themselves. "What's that?" Lirio inquired in a shocked tone, moving onto his hands and knees, looking at Majitani as well. Tonpa and Kurapika's attention were drawn to the platform as well. "Well, it's been a while, and he hasn't moved an inch," Gon explained. The green-haired boy watched as Lirio sprinted to the front, jogging right behind him, Kilua a close third. Kurapika moved to stand, Tonpa following with a grunt. Right in front of their bridge connecting to the platform, Lirio stood, observing. "But, the other prisoner said that he didn't die, he was only unconscious," Iida argued. Bakugo's eye twitched. "4 eyes, those locked up bastards are desperate. If they can delay by even an hour, that's a year off their sentence." "Bakugo's right," Tokiyami nodded. "A little lying won't be the worst thing these prisoners have done. Damn it. He's too far away to tell," the man cursed. "Hey. We want to check his body." Lirio called out to the far side where the prisoners were. The cloaked figure stepped forward. "What's that?" they said. "He could already be dead," Lirio stated, pointing a finger over at the man. "I already told you, he's only unconscious," they repeated. "How many hours do you think have passed? I can't just take your word for it," Lirio argued. "They could ask Kurapika to check, it's still his match," said Uraraka. Todoroki's brow raised for a quick moment, unbelieving of the prisoner being dead. "It's been at a standstill for hours, the least they can do is at least wake him up and get him to surrender," Midnight stated. The curve of a smile appeared over the prisoner's hood that cloaked the bottom part of their face. "Then let's make a bet," they offered. "A bet? On what?" Lirio asked, slightly confused yet cautious. "On whether he's dead or alive," they answered. Majitani was still, face down on the ground, unmoving. "What would we wager?" Lirio demanded. Warped clocks appeared, with a timer of 60 hours and 50 minutes counting, the sound of a ticking clock heard. "Time," the prisoner said. "Can they do that? Wouldn't that technically be a match?" Juro questioned. "This way gives the prisoners a significant advantage," Gran Torino said. "Time," Lirio whispered after them. Lirio's heated expression faced off against the prisoner's masked face, their purple eyes shining through. "We will settle our match through a betting game, a gamble," they said. A single shining coin dropped between them. "And we'll use time, rather than chips." The coin glinted and fell, bouncing off the ground. "Look at the monitor on the wall," they instructed. The scoreboard popped up, this time with 50-50. "We each have 50 hours to use. However, we can only wager in multiples of 10, they continued. "Well, guess they can," Present Mike said under his breath. So the result of Kurapika's match will be decided at the start of Liurio's, Izuku said, eyes glued to the screen. We continue placing bets until one of us has no hours left, they explained, purple eyes piercing at Liurio, who matched back with an equally determined gaze. A ding was heard, as 3 counted down to 2 and counted down to 1 before reaching 0. A match where we gamble time, Liurio considered. We'll take turns deciding what to bet on, they explained the game. The group paid rapt attention, Tonpa listening in half-heartedly. If you end up with 0 hours, your time limit to clear the tower will also be shortened by 50 hours. Several eyes widened. Oh come on, that's not F, Mina began, before catching herself and grumbling quietly. What shit luck. This is great, they can speedrun it. Twice exclaimed. And if you end up with 0 hours? Liurio asked. Our sentence will be extended by 50 years, they replied back. Liurio was slightly taken back. Fierce eyes stared at him adamantly as they said, if these terms are acceptable, I'll check whether he's still alive or not. The two stared each other down in a silent battle, eyes narrowing simultaneously. Multiple monitors were set up, as Lippo observed. Larout. Serving a 112-year sentence for trafficking endangered wildlife and violating gambling laws, the examiner mentioned. Yikes. Adding 50 more years to a 100-year sentence feels like beating a dead horse, Power Loader said. Aizawa sighed internally. Strong point in betting and having a record of illegal gambling. Liurio's gonna bet he's alive, right? I mean, he has to be, Hagakure said nervously. Lippo watched their cloaked figure through the screen. This match sounds like her kind of game. Larout stood quietly, still obscured by her heavy robes. Man, this woman is crazy. The group watched, Liurio standing arms crossed. She's willing to risk extending her own sentence, the man quietly said, reflecting on the terms of the match. With a risk that big, there definitely has to be some type of reassurance, Tsunade said. Majitani may not be as unconscious as we're led to believe, the sidekick thought to himself. Consider your answer carefully, Liurio, Kurapika spoke up. The man turned subtly to listen. If you lose, we'll have 50 less hours with which to clear the tower, Kurapika warned him, gray eyes regarding him carefully. The man immediately scoffed, tilting his head up, eyes closed. You shouldn't talk, he began bitterly. Kurapika crossed his arms and closed his eyes stubbornly as Liurio scolded. After all, this is your fault, for not finishing him off. Liurio chided, pointing a finger. Oh god, no this again, not now, Ojiro sighed, facepalming. Every second counts, and they're wasting more time with this senseless back and forth, Midnight shook her head. Neither of them were truly in the wrong, but their communication skills need to drastically improve if they plan on working together to pass this phase, Aizawa thought. Fine, Kurapika huffed, turning his face away even further, as Liurio crossed his arms and turned the other way as well. Kahlua stood in the middle of the two, with a deer in headlights expression. I won't say another word. Kurapika said pettily. Kahlua's head turned as he looked at the two huffing at each other, adopting a cat-like expression. Hey, we shouldn't fight amongst ourselves. Gon interjected with a disquieted look. Kahlua quietly sighed, with a cute comical cat expression, his hands up in a hopeless shrug. And we thought, those two working together would be the worst it could get, Magna whispered, gesturing to Dabi and Shigaraki. Toga giggled slightly as she looked in their direction. Shigaraki scowled and his eyes narrowed razor-sharp. Tanpa watched passively, before a hand came up to conceal his smirk. Keep going, he thought. Right. Lirio shouted, invigorated once more as he pointed straight at the other side. I accept your challenge. His voice echoed slightly, filling the vast emptiness. Okay. I chose our first bet, so you can decide how many hours we'll wager on whether he's dead or alive, she offered to him. Majitani's body was shown once more. Lirio's face grew more firm as he considered her words. The man pointed a finger up. I bet 10 hours that he's alive, Lirio declared. Bendot laughed from where he sat behind Larout, looking over at Lirio. What's this? You were the one whining over his being dead, the man taunted slightly. Kirishima's mood soured at Tanpa's internal dialogue. Zero rolled his eyes. I'm not saying it can't be done, but for that dude to die from a single punch, it seems so unlikely, the boy said. Please shut up, Juro mumbled at Bendo's words. Larout giggled slightly at his words. Very well. Then let's check, she agreed. She moved to walk across the bridge onto the platform, Lirio as well with a determined expression. You're being pretty cautious, Kurapika noted, his arms still crossed and eyes closed. I thought you weren't going to say another word, Lirio reminded him, drawing a scoff from the blonde. 10 hours, huh? Tanpa thought, with a smirk on his face. Lirio walked over with his hands stuffed in his pockets, thinking. This was the obvious choice. Even if I'm wrong, as long as we confirm his death, Kurapika will have won his round. The blonde in question watched Lirio retreating back carefully, his face turned to the side. Even if Kurapika's match ended up being decided on as a forfeit, Lirio would be in the lead, so it won't be entirely their loss, Momo said. Win or loss, they'll make the most out of it, Izuku added. Nedzu watched, expressionless. If I bet that he's dead and he's really just unconscious, then it'd be adding insult to the injury, the man thought, as he finally reached the platform, a few feet away from Larout who was still masked, Majitani's body in the middle of the two. The scoreboard to the side depicted 50-50. Lirio regarded the woman for a moment, before removing his hands from his pockets as he bent down and flipped Majitani onto his front. He leaned into his neck and with 2 fingers, checked for a pulse. The sound of blood pumping could be heard, signifying the prisoner was still alive. A portion of the students let out a sigh of relief. The dude's not dead, and they're in the lead. Kaminari exclaimed. They're not in the clear yet, Bakugo said, realizing what it really meant. Huh. The blonde crossed his arms. They're not gonna keep this match going without a decision for the previous one. That poser didn't die or surrender, so they're just gonna keep waiting on him. Then they need to wake him. They can let Lirio do that at least, right? Kirishima said, frowning. In the back, Compress sighed. And what good would it do for the prisoners to give their opponents a lead? Quote. See. He's only unconscious, Larout chimed. So it seems, Lirio said. The scoreboard dinged, as it changed to 40/60ths. All right. Gon cheered slightly from their side. Lirio has the lead. Quote. This is bad, Kahlua said, his arms propped up behind his head. Huh. Gon looked over at him quizzically. It's possible he isn't going to wake up, Kahlua said, observing Lirio and Larout. What do you mean? Kurapika asked. The white-haired boy placed his hands down, turning around to look at the older. Remember when that woman walked near the guy on the floor? Quote. What of it? Kurapika asked him. Kahlua turned back to look at the platform. I thought then, that he was already dead. The four of them watched Lirio bent over Magitani who lay on the ground. Sir Night-Eye's lips pressed into a thin line. The prisoners' original goal is to do nothing but buy time. Winning or losing these matches are not essential here. Cheating. They're definitely cheating, Present Mike said. But on second thought, Kahlua continued. Magitani's eye was glazed over and hazy, veins sprouting from the sides as Lirio held it open with his hand. They'd obviously prefer him alive, but stay unconscious. Lirio withdrew his hand, watching Magitani's face with a serious expression. The other prisoners were shown all sat in the hallway, Bendot the only one watching with an all-too-knowing smile. If he doesn't wake up before the test ends, it shortens their sentences by 72 years, Kahlua explained. The wrist timer displayed the remaining time to be 60 hours and 38 minutes counting. How are they gonna prove this dude's awake? Ciro wondered. Stab him. Tickle him. Twice shouted. Ciro held himself back from turning around to give the villain a ridiculous look. There are a few things they can try, Aizawa said wryly, a smile with too many teeth on his face. The students felt a slight shiver creep around them. Kahlua looked away from his timer, as Gon spoke up. So if he doesn't wake up at all, we're... Quote. That's my point. Kahlua cut him off. That's been their intention all along, Kurapika realized, as the three of them looked back over at the platform. Kahlua watched intently, waiting for Lirio's next course of action. The man backed up, facing Larout. Well, it's your turn, Larout prompted him. Decide what we'll bet on. Lirios have to have noticed it, Iida remarked. If the idiot hasn't, I'll punch him through the screen myself, Bakugo darkly promised. Let's see, Lirio began carefully. The others watched tensely, Tonpa with a shit-eating grin, his arms crossed. Magitani lay facing up, the left side of his face swelled from the hit he received earlier. Lirio pointed at him, expression unreadable. How about we bet on whether he's really unconscious or not? Lirio said. Huh. Larout startled, her head jerking back slightly. The expression of the three brightened at Lirio's bet. I see, Kahlua said to himself. Tonpa hummed, leaning in with interest. All for one, let out a small noise of impression, believing that the man wouldn't notice the obvious signs. Yeah. It's time to turn the tables on them. Kirishima smiled, a motivated look on his face. Hey, what now? Magitani thought from where he laid, his eyes open in small slivers, sweat concentrating on his face. The note didn't cover this. Single quote. A flashback appeared of the man's eyes fluttering slowly, a piece of paper with foreign lettering written onto it. When I woke up, the note next to me said, Magitani's eye that wasn't swollen and purple had read the note, from where he laid on his stomach, face turned to the side. Of course, Uraraka scoffed. Keep pretending you're out cold, hide this note in your mouth. The man reflected. The prisoner was frozen in position, stuck on what to do. I understood the plan. A bolt of lightning appeared, symbolizing his understanding of what to do. If I stayed down until the time ran out, we'd get 72 years of our sentences, he internally weighed, as he feigned unconsciousness. So, then what do I do? Should I stay down? Single quote. How didn't they catch him hiding that note? Suyu wondered. Momo turned to her. Probably when they were all focused on Lirio and Kurapika's spat. Okay, no one else is questioning that this guy seriously thinks he'd be able to stay in place for the next 2 days. 13 said in a tone of disbelief. It really isn't quite plausible, but I believe the intention was to get him to stay down for as long as he could, Nedzu replied. Very well, Larout accepted, no signs of unsteadiness in her voice. I bet 20 hours that he really is unconscious, she betted confidently. As Majitani lay still, in his mind he freaked out, eyes blown wide, tongue out in surprise. Okay, I got it. The prisoner fretted. I'm gonna keep acting like I'm unconscious. Single quote. A bit of laughter erupted from his reaction. Yeah, no way this dude's gonna make it, Juro claimed, biting back a smile. But how do we confirm whether he's really unconscious? Larout asked Lirio. The man wordlessly removed his hand that had found his way back in his pocket out, bent down to Majitani and grabbed his bicep, slinging his arm over his shoulder. Oh, that's simple, Lirio said confidently, standing up, dragging Majitani with him. With weighted steps, he trudged over to the edge of the platform. This guy's heavy, Lirio commented, grunting slightly. Shigaraki's eyes widened slightly in realization. Wait, what is he doing? Sato questioned with a confused look. Bakugo grinned sharply. Larout turned to watch him, her face still obscured. Lirio's hand clutched the area between Majitani's neck and shoulder, holding him off the edge of the platform. I'll just toss him off the edge, Lirio told her simply. Majitani began to freak out on the inside, rearing back. What the hell? The man screamed on the inside, expression blown wide. If he's really unconscious, he'll simply fall to his death, Lirio said. The drop off the platform was shown, wind howling from the bottom that was concealed in pitch-black dark. Dude, Kaminari said, slightly speechless. Nedzu smiled a bit too wide and unhinged. Is he willing to self-sacrifice and give his fellow prisoners the chance of a lesser sentence? Quote. Let it be known, I wouldn't piss on any of you to put out a fire, Dabi blandly declared. You'd most likely be the reason we're on fire, Spinner replied back dryly. Are you insane? Larout asked him, trying to remain composed. His match hasn't been settled yet. We can't accept those terms. She argued. Lirio smiled slightly. Don't worry. If he falls and dies, we'll forfeit the match, which will give you a total of 2 wins, Lirio said to her. Majitani's face was sweating profusely as he remained slack in the loose grip of Lirio. Gon and Kurapika smiled proudly at Lirio's offer, Kahlua watching with a slightly impressed look, Tonpa sporting a sour look. Is that satisfactory? Lirio asked. The real choice is hers now. They both know he's feigning, and putting their life over his is out of the question, Gran Torino said. Question is, will she keep the facade? Quote. Larout's face was partially revealed, pink skin with thin lips, a purple eye glinting. Yes, it is, she accepted, closing her eyes. What was that? Don't be ridiculous, Majitani squawked internally, face disbelieving. We're talking about my life here. The man wailed on the inside. But then I'm changing my wager, Larout said. I bet 40 hours that he isn't unconscious. Everything I have left. And the truth is revealed at last, Compress commented, a smile underneath his mask. If I were him, I'd choose to start waking up right about now, Shinso snorted. The other three's expressions were wide, at the sudden switch up. Tonpa grinned. Hey, little sneak, Lirio chuckled. You're finally showing your true colors. Her eye glinted through the hood, with veiled intent. The thumping of a heart was heard, slow and steady. Majitani's face was shown, sweat now pouring down. Kahlua, Gon and Kurapika watched with rapt attention. The heart began to thump faster. Tanta's face remained smug, watching with hooded eyes. Majitani's heart raced, as sweat trickled off his face down his neck. "Then, I'll let go of him," Lirio stated, voice low, as he watched Majitani closely for a reaction. Lirio let go, Majitani beginning to fall back. "He won't really let himself fall, will he?" Tokiyami briefly questioned, watching the prisoner continue to play dead. The prisoner cried out pitifully, flailing wildly to keep his balance on the platform, only one foot on solid ground. "Whoa! Wait! I'm awake! I'm awake!" he shouted loudly, Lirio watching him. He wildly contorted his body, trying to prevent himself from falling to his death. "Don't let go!" Quote. The prisoner swiped with both hands for Lirio's arm, missing horribly as he panicked even more, whimpering fearfully. "Wait! Whoa!" he begged. "I'm gonna fall!" Lirio watched him for a moment more as he leaned back dangerously far. Izuku watched nervously, wondering if Lirio would let the man fall on his own. Toga tilted her head curiously, watching the man, screaming for his life. With a clap, he firmly grasped Majitani's wrist, a satisfied smile on his face. "Good morning," he said with a fake cheer. Lirio flung the prisoner back onto solid ground. Majitani stumbled over his feet, before falling onto the ground. "You're all crazy," he accused. The man stood up, clenching his fists. "I've had enough. I lost plain and simple. Forget the sentence reduction." Majitani stomped off of the platform towards the bridge. "It wouldn't have gone this far, if this were accepted from the beginning," Aizawa uttered, watching the prisoner with a bitter distaste. "Someone's a sore loser," Siro shrugged. "It's safer in prison, damn it." He cursed, running back across the bridge to the prisoner's side. Lirio walked past Larout, to stand side by side. "You knew that he was awake," she said to him. "It may not seem like it, but I'm a pre-med," Lirio smiled. He turned towards her. "I can tell if someone's awake by checking their eye movement." The scoreboard dinged again, the score changing to 80/20ths. "There's a lot of involuntary muscle and eye movement that give away a person who's awake compared to when you're sleeping," Recovery Girl supported. Hagakure winced. Lirio got the win for Kurapika, but his own matches barely started and it looks like he's gonna lose it. Quote. "However, you're down to 20 hours, she told him. "But now we have a 2-1 lead, he countered, watching her warily. The scoreboard on the overhead of their side switched from 1 to 2. The three watched Lirio with relieved looks. Tanpa lingered in the back, arms crossed with an irritated look. Now, Lirio pointed a finger at her boldly. "It's your turn. What do you want to bet on next?" She stood a few feet in front of him, fully cloaked without saying a word. Behind her hood, she looked at him with an intrigued expression, a small smile gracing her lips. Even if she's close to a win, so far Lirio's been on a roll, beating her at her own game. He just might turn it around, Smintas speculated. And if Lirio wins this one, they get to move on. After so long, Mina sighed, eager to see what else was in store for the group. Majitani surrenders, giving Gon and his friends a 2-1 lead. Majitani stood on the prisoner's side, watching the match along with Sadokan and Bendot, both seated. The four on the other side all stood watching the face-off. However, in the time betting match, they're down 80-20, the scoreboard appeared, scores 80/20ths, Larout and Lirio's respectively. The two stood apart facing each other, the four torches in the corners of the platform, tall and burning brightly, illuminating the area. What will Larout choose next to bet on? Quote. You know, Lirio really worries me sometimes, but he always ends up making up for it, Kirishima proudly said. Hot-headed for sure, but it's not like we haven't seen hotheads before. Mina added. Her eyes briefly crossed with Bakugos, who tensed and scowled immensely. Got something to say, Pinky? Quote. Mina laughed shortly before turning her gaze from the boy. I'm still kinda salty how she took advantage of the situation and created a match where they were betting on time, Jiro said. Midoriya nodded in agreement. It'll be like rubbing salt in the wound, they lose the match and 50 hours. Who knows how long the final match could be as well if they lose this one. Well, the only option is for them to win. So they'll win. Uraraka said happily. Toga leaned in her seat dramatically, yellow snake-like eyes peering up at the ceiling. Ya know, I really wish they let Kahlua go first. Maybe then, things would get interesting. Magna patted her head sympathetically. A team carefully balancing on a foundation built out of sticks and stones. One wrong word and the whole thing threatens to blow down, Compress mused. We might have them beat on teamwork, Spinner snorted. Shigaraki rolled his eyes, subconsciously itching himself while grumbling. Ah, I really thought they were done there for a moment. Midnight nervously laughed, pleased that the group turned things around. Sharp eyes, Kahlua has, Nedzu chirped. And certainly not bothered by killing people. Pointless of him to run away from home since he kills like it's breathing, Endeavor sneered slightly. The atmosphere around them grew dark once more. Kahlua never explicitly stated that he ran away because he despises killing or anything of the sort. He said he couldn't stand their expectations of him, Aizawa countered. If he was met with the proper guidance, he could lead a life in the light, All Might said hopefully. He's hanging around someone like Gon, maybe the kid'll rub off, Present Mike offered. Amongst the talking, the screen came to life again, drawing their conversations to a close and their attention. Unfortunately, this part is over. I hope you enjoyed it. My apologies for all those quotes. Please have a good morning, afternoon, evening or night. See you next time, faves.